Okay, we'll do good with
You're
that.
good. You're good.
All right. Hello, my name is Raquel and I am an alcoholic. Stay muted, please, and let us open this meeting with a moment of silence followed by the we version of the Serenity Prayer for those who care to join. God, grant us that serenity to accept the things we cannot change, courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Okay, so welcome to, and it means, of course, that we are going to talk about God. Tonight, it's a night of conversation with Tarek and Brendan. This is not an AA meeting. This is a forum where we meet to hear individuals that tell us in their personal stories and in their own language, the way they establish their relationship with God. When therefore we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. This applies to other spiritual expressions which you may hear in this meeting. Do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. We're going to be meeting twice a month on Wednesday at 8 Eastern Time. This gathering came from an inspiration on page 45 in the basic text of Alcoholics Anonymous, which reads, well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself which will solve your problem. That means that we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. And it means, of course, that we are going to talk about God. The format of this meeting is as follows. We have two guest speakers who have agreed to have a conversation with us for the full duration of the meeting, which is approximately an hour and 15 minutes. The chat feature will be disabled now, and it will be reopened at the 50-minute mark to send questions directly to our speakers. In order for you to experience this as a conversation, right now I'm going to spotlight both of the speakers at the same time. So what you're going to see is both of the speakers in your big screen, and if you want to change the view, you can do it at your leisure. This is a very relaxed time together, so we can hear and participate in a conversation between two alcoholics. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy. And now you're going to bear with me with my poor little, where are you, Tarek? Here you are. I'm going to introduce Tarek, but let me just spotlight him for everybody, number one. And I'm going to, would you raise your hand for me, Brandon, please? So you can come to the front of my screen.
There we go. Did it work?
No estás. You're not here. Hold on.
I'll get it again. Raise hand. There we go.
Okay, here you are.
That should be right up front.
Add you. There you go. Okay, so this is both of you. Okay, so now before we begin, I'm going to introduce Tarek because this is the person that I asked today to speak for us. Honest to God, I don't know him that much, but I have the pleasure to see him on Thursdays when we have our little time with a very nice sponsor we have. And every time he says, every time he speaks, I'm like, wow, that's so insightful. Wow, that is like, wow. I am actually really very excited. And I actually realized something. He has, I don't know how he does it, but that's what I see that happens. Like he gathers ideas and just funnels them really nice. So I'm actually very excited to hear him. And the meeting is all yours. Both of you, welcome and thank you for agreeing to do this.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Raquel. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name's TAREK. I'm also a member of two other 12-step fellowships. A power greater than myself separated me from alcohol and a host of other substances on the morning of November 5th in 2007. And because of a loving and merciful God, I found it unnecessary to use alcohol or any other mind-altering substance to treat any degree of psychological pain that I'm experiencing. And because of that, I believe that I have a debt to repay God, and I'm the only one that can repay that debt. So when Raquel came to me and asked me to do this, of course, the answer was yes. It's part of how I live this role as a servant that I have been assigned, even though my ego would like to step in from time to time and convince me that this show is all about me. And I struggle with that, like all of us do on this call. And so, of course, I talked to Ralph, and I didn't know Ralph and Leslie had done it last week. And so I went into prayer, and I think she might have called me on Monday or Tuesday, and I went into prayer. I prayed several times over the course of the next couple of days. And Ralph and I have been having these conversations about mentorship and sponsorship and teacher, and how those aren't the best words. And then this word came to me through a sponsee of mine, and it touched my heart at such a deep level. Companionship. And I look at Ralph as a companion. He's at the head of the line. He's further down the path, but he breaks away from the front of the line, and he comes back and tells us these stories about what's up ahead. And when I think of a companion on this journey, I think of Brandon and the evolution, how God has transformed our relationship. And so before I go any further, I want Brandon to introduce himself and share just a little bit about himself real quick. And then I'll take it back, Brandon, and then I'll send us down another path.
I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Brandon, and this is the way I introduce myself all the time. My sobriety date is June 15th, 2011. That was not the date I picked. That was the day that was thrust upon me by some power that I didn't understand. I have a sponsor, and he has a sponsor, both of which are on this call. I sponsor people, and they sponsor people, and I think those are all important things to bring up, because if I don't bring them up, then, well, you might not believe that I'm actually working this thing that we call a program, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, that's contained within the big book. And I think that's all I'm going to say for my introduction. So back to you, Tarek.
Okay, I will take the baton. So Brandon and I spend a lot of weekends together, and we talk to groups of people about God in our lives, the transformative, regenerative power of God. And he and I started 10-stepping with each other back in 2012. At that time, he was just a guy that I was working with. And I had knee surgery, and Brandon used to come pick me up at the house because I couldn't get around. I couldn't drive a car. And he and I we bonded together. And we bonded because we were both excited and curious about the spiritual realm. And we wanted to go deeper into that world. And so we became partners in that world. And I've heard both of us talk about the subject I want to talk about for a few minutes, which, Brandon, that you and I didn't need a conception of God in order for the power of God to work in our lives. And your story that you tell about the splice, about being on your dad's back porch, I've always thought that's such a powerful story as it relates. And we want to tell stories tonight. And before Brandon takes it to tell that story, I'm always reminded of this image, this story of back in the 1800s, before we had electricity. We used kerosene a lot. And there was a man in each town. He was called the lamplighter. And at dusk, his job would begin, and his job was to go around and light all the lamps. And you never knew where the lamplighter was, and you never knew where the lamplighter was going to be, but you always knew where the lamplighter had been. And that's a lot of what I want to tell with these stories we're about to tell is, life is lived forward, but it's understood in the rear view. And if we really think of God, my favorite image of God is a tapestry. He or she or it is working on this elaborate tapestry, and Tarek and Brandon and everybody on this call, we're just one little thread in that tapestry. And it's been weaving in our lives, the grand chess master, as I like to refer to God as. And so, Brandon, I'm going to let you take over now. Tell your beautiful story about that horrific night and how you entered, Ralph talks about October 10th, 1986, and then something else happened on October 11th, 1986. And please forgive me if I got the dates wrong, but there was something different, right? He hadn't worked any steps he didn't know a concept of God or a conception of God on October 11th. What was it? What was it that showed up on October 11th in Ralph's life? What was it that showed up in my life on November 5th? And here's the interesting thing with Brandon. It showed up a few weeks before the surrender. So I turn it over to you, Brandon.
Well, and as I turned it back over to you, I realized that I wanted to thank Raquel for this. I mean, like, what a cool idea for a meeting, right? Like my stepson called me the other day. He was procrastinating again and trying to figure out a way to get motivated. And he was asking me what my hobbies are, and I said working on projects around the farm and spending time with your mom, and I was like, and I like talking about God. I like talking about spiritual stuff, and if you want to get me in a conversation, then have me go down that route. Some of my sponsees have figured it out, other ones just haven't, but that's okay. They'll figure it out whenever they do. So thank you for the whole format, the whole everything about it. Love it. Um, just like, why did nobody think of this before? Maybe somebody has. I don't know. So the splice that Tarek's talking about is this wonderful, horrific night near the end of May of 2011. Um, I had an experience where the drinking was getting worse and worse, and it was the walls were kind of closing in on me, and it appeared as if maybe my wife was getting tired of me, and so different wife, honey. She's in the other room, and she said she yelled through the door, never, which is the contrast is amazing, really. It must be something having to do with God. But so I was sitting there in the basement of my house, this thing that I had built, like the life that I thought I was supposed to have, the 5 bedroom house, the nice car, everything. I had all of it, and I was still miserable. And I was staying in the basement where I kept my pistol, and I kept going back to the beer fridge to get another beer. And the resolution was I was going to go in there and shoot myself in the face, and that was going to be it. Some people, I've only told this part of the story once, but as the night was kind of getting later and later, I realized that, like, maybe the scene that my wife was out with some friends, and maybe the scene, the ugliness of what I had done wasn't going to be in its magnificence when she got home. And so I realized that maybe it wasn't going to happen that night. So I put the kids in the car, took them to a neighbor's house, asked if they could spend the night, and then drove with my dog to my parents' house about an hour away. And as it would, it doesn't, like Tarek said, life is lived forward and understood in reverse. I tried to get into my parents' house using the key that was in the key box, and I couldn't get in their house. The key wouldn't work. It wouldn't work on any of the doors. That was the most confusing thing. Of course, I was still hammered because I took plenty of beer with me on the way up there. And so I resolved myself to the fact that I wasn't going to get in the house, and I made a bed out of patio cushions and towels, and my dog and I passed out on the back patio, and woke up the following morning with my dad bumping me with his foot, wondering what the hell I was doing on his back patio. And I I I always had a story for why I was going to be somewhere, or I always knew what you were going to say, so I'm going to say this, and then so on and so forth, and but this morning, like, I had no reason to be there. Like, I couldn't explain it away. And so I just politely asked him if he would go inside. He agreed to do so. And this is how I describe it, but this doesn't describe it. In that moment, the birds were louder, the sun was brighter, the air was crisper, and the magnitude of what had almost happened the night before was thrust upon me. And I knew that it had something to do with alcohol, and it scared the heck out of me, and it sobered me up for 4 days. And 4 days later, the cycle repeated. And it was 2 weeks after that I was struck sober through another wonderfully horrific experience. But one of my favorite misery movies that I used to enjoy during my drunken days, and I've still enjoyed it even being sober now, is this movie called Vanilla Sky with Tom Cruise and Penelope Cruz. And in this movie, there's this moment where this guy has this terrible evening, and he has a splice happen in his life to where he goes on and lives on an entire existence that's completely different than the one that he was living before, that was kind of like impressed over his old existence, so that the old existence went away. And one day he wakes up later on in the movie and he realizes that it was all a dream. And then it kind of all makes sense why his life turned out perfectly. Well, for me, the existence that I live today and the people that are in my life and the way that I exist cannot exist in the same lifetime as the lifetime I had before. Now, it's connected because I still have the kids, my parents are still in it, my resume travels. But the way that I experience existence today in no way, no how resembles the old way of existence. And so because of that, I refer to it as like it's almost like a new life was spliced or stitched in to create a new existence. And that's the only explanation for why this life seems so different from the old life. So
You
it's
know,
not it's not even like a recreate. It's not even a recreation. It's like the third step promise to say is like we were reborn, completely new existence. So back to you.
well, the reason I wanted you to tell that story because I've heard that story so many times, and it touches me at such a profound, deep level every time I hear it because it's the evidence I need. Listening to Brandon, and when I listen to all of your stories, it's like a mirror's being held up, and I get to look deeper into my own soul, into my own spirit. And as I listen to Brandon, it's so clear to me that God's in our lives long before we get sober. That if I look back and I take the time to look back, that the hand of God has always been there. And I love how he uses the analogy for the movie. It's like there is a spice, there's this thing. It's like a door opens up. We walked into a new realm. And when I hear that story, that's what I think of. Even though I know it's 2 weeks later, there's something profound about that experience on the edge of that porch in the morning when the air is crisper and the sun's a little bit brighter and the birds are a little bit louder that has to do with the power of God. Um, I mean, for me, Brandon's also heard this. I'm going to tell this story in hopefully 2 minutes, but for me, it's I had no intention of coming to Alcoholics Anonymous. I was living out of a hotel, traveling around the country, going to concerts and selling drugs to make a living so I could support my lifestyle. And God dressed up as a bunch of police officers, and he showed up in my life one night, and he knocked on the door, and he said, "Okay, you're going to be incarcerated for a while." And that was on the evening of November 4th in 2007. I found myself, I hadn't slept in 5 or 6 days at this point. I'm sitting on the edge of the cot in this Duval County jail down in Jacksonville, Florida. The sun is coming up. And like Brandon, my life gets spliced by the power of God. I don't know it's God working in my life at this point. But what I do realize is I sit on the edge of that cot that I had a new sobriety date because I started going to Alcoholics. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous for the first time in 2004. This is November 2007. And I'm sitting on the edge of this cot and I realize my new sobriety date is my friend Jason's birthday. Why? You guys are on this call like, what's so important about Jason's birthday? Well, Jason had died on my birthday in 2003. So this grand master is stitching this portion of the tapestry, and he lines it up for me to believe. Now I could be hallucinating this. I was sleep deprived. I was on many substances at this time, sitting in this jail without any sleep. And what comes to me is injected into my consciousness. I am so deliberate with the words I am using right now because it wasn't a train of successive thoughts and that culminated into the realization. It was thrust upon me. I love that word, Brandon. Thrust upon me that my new sobriety date had a significant meaning in God, the universe, higher something was trying to communicate with me. And so there begins my little journey in this 5-week incarceration, where I have experience after experience. An old timer that tried to carry the message to me a year and a half before. I went to big book studies at his house. I couldn't stand him. I assassinated his character. We'd go outside after meetings because he was the closer. He closed every meeting on Friday night. We would sit there and talk bad about this man, and I'm sitting in the county jail, and God is showing him to me in my mind, in my these thoughts of going to find this man because he has my answer. Passing books around the jail, going to the Bible study, hearing words that I heard in Alcoholics Anonymous like gratitude and surrender and restitution. It was jailhouse religion, but it was directing me back to Alcoholics Anonymous. I read these books, 2 books, both of which reference the 12-step fellowships. And then I go to my arraignment. And this is where my splice takes place. I used to think the splice, Brandon, happened for me on the edge of that cot. But the more I reflect on my past, I hear your story, the more I'm starting to realize that I think my splice happened in the courtroom. Because I don't know about anybody else on this call, but I'm the type of alcoholic who disappears, whose family has no idea where he is, whose phone only gets turned on if he needs something. And so he's in this jail. And they truck me across the street to the courthouse. They handcuff me at my wrist and on my ankles. We're brought into the sequestered part of the courtroom. A friend of mine, the hand of God, he gets me an attorney. This attorney had been a police officer, prosecutor. Now he's a defense attorney. The hand of God. I'm in the palm of God's hand the whole time. My whole life. You know what God said during that incarceration? You're not going to squirm out anymore. You're not squirming out of my hand. I got you now. And they take me to this arraignment, and the attorney, his name was Travis, he approaches me, and I turned to him. And I said, "Have you talked to my mother?" He goes, "Yeah, she's right there in the gallery." And so as I turned to face my mother, that's when my splice happened. My vision was distorted. Everything on the outside got blurry. This little clear pathway between me and my mom. And what did I see? How my selfish and inconsiderate habits destroy people. Not how my addiction and my alcoholism destroy people, but TAREK at his very best. Without the power of God in his life, he turns this beautiful woman into a frail person with her eyes sunk in her head, with skin hanging off her bones because she looks like she hasn't eaten in a while, who almost buckles, her knees buckled in the courtroom. And what happened to TAREK in that moment, Brandon? You probably know the words too. I was split wide open, reduced to absolutely nothing, and raised from the scrap heap to know a life that I had never known. I didn't know that God was opening the door. I didn't know he'd already unlocked the lock and opened it. And so we talk about this thing about you don't need to have a conception of God for the power of God to be working in your life. The word concept to me has a finality to it, but conception seems to be something that's ongoing. It doesn't end. And so, Brandon, the next thing I want to talk about, and I want to hear from you about, is how your conception has evolved over these years, and where, and at some point tonight, you got to do Mason's letter. The letter she wrote you, and then you got to do the letter when they threw the ashes. So make sure you talk about that tonight. So you take the baton. It's all you.
As you were talking and we were doing split wide open, it made me think of like Hulkamania and your favorite shirt. So maybe we'll hear that story too. Like, so the I'm thrown off because I'm thinking like I put that letter in a very safe place, but I've moved it to a very much safer place, and I'm wondering if it's in the room with me. Anyway, so what? How's my concept changed? Well, I mean, I guess I had to have one to begin with. It was interesting. I don't know that it was funny, but I was at a sponsee's younger brother's funeral last Friday, and it was in a Catholic cathedral in Augusta, Georgia, built in 1863 and beautiful. And And they come around to give communion. And for those of you who are not Catholic, if you're not Catholic, you're not supposed to get the communion. And I go up there and I got communion because I was raised with a concept of God that was based in Catholicism. And and although I really appreciate the teachings of that are in the Bible and that I haven't really done a whole lot of participation in the church, mostly because it was kind of one of those things where it's like I was required to go. And so I being an alcoholic the way that I am and just not liking people to tell me what to do, I didn't particularly care for that. And so when it was possible for me to not go, I just didn't go anymore. I've been to other churches since, but so that was kind of the concept I started with. And then like, if I tell that little, I'll try to do it quick. The part of my story where I was struck sober is I was on a week-long vacation on an island with no bridge off the coast of South Carolina, where you have to schedule your way on and off the island. And in the middle of the week, I had miscalculated an argument with my wife, and she announced to her parents and to me that she no longer wanted to be married to me, which kind of was a shock to everybody. I kind of even think it was a shock to her when she said it out loud. But once she said it out loud, it was clear that she meant it. And there was no change in her mind. And so, because you have to schedule the ferry off the island, I was stuck on this island for the next 4 days listening to my wife and the mother and her mother tell me what was wrong with me. And there were all these questions that were being thrown at me and asked, and things like from my mother-in-law, do you think you could stay sober the rest of your life? And my response was, well, yeah, except for, weddings and funerals and things like that. And it was funny because when I was at this funeral on last Friday, there were several people afterwards that were actually boozing it up pretty good. And I'm like, see, that's what you're supposed to do at a funeral, right? And so, but so I spent a bunch of this time with these people kind of challenging me as to whether or not I really had a drinking problem. And we got home from that vacation, and I was sleeping in the big bed, and my wife was in the guest room, and the dog wouldn't sleep with me anymore. I mean, slept with me on that night where the splice happened, but by the time we get home, she doesn't want anything to do with me, and I'm sitting there doing one of those weepy, snotty cries where you blow bubbles and you weep and you can't catch your breath, and at that point in time, I just got down on my knees next to the bed and I said, God, I don't even know if you exist, but if you do, just make it better. Whole prayer. That was all it was. And in that moment, like a sense of peace came over me. And because, house, wife, car, kids, everything got thrust or pulled away from me when she kicked me out, I had nothing to do except for my plan was to return to work and make so much money that she regretted the day that she ever left me. And I returned to work on that Monday and I got fired. And so, like, this complete failure at living and complete failure at dying was kind of like where I was. And I was left with a bunch of questions of like, what am I doing here? And so it wasn't even so much even a concept. It was just this, I know it's not me. And I know that this isn't working at all and that I can't go on this way. And so what happened for me is I think that it just kind of opened the door and I became a little bit teachable. And then within a week or so, I ended up going to my first meeting with a friend of mine, and there was this guy named Bill that was sitting in the middle of the room. And I can't tell you anything that happened at that meeting other than Debbie and Linda were sitting at the front of the room on the couch, and they were the head of AA in my mind. I tried to sign in on the newcomer packet because I thought I thought they were taking a roll. And then there was one chair. There was one chair. There was a guy named Bill sitting in the middle of the room, and he said, if you pray to God for direction, you better be willing to move your feet. And it was one of those things where it was like, huh, okay. Didn't think of that. Like, I'm going to have to do something here. And so, like, my concept of God in the beginning wasn't even really much of a concept as much as it seemed like whatever this force was kept forcing me into situations where I had to do something different than I had ever done. I had to go interview for my job every day. I had to become a consultant. I had to become entirely honest with somebody and then with a woman that I wanted to date. And so, like, I'm not even sure that the concept of God, like, if you asked me the first time I went through the steps, even what my concept of God was, it probably trended towards the Christian God, but I don't even know that, like, in the beginning, there was anything other than it's not me. And so, like, how did you kind of like, what was the starting point for your conception and how you got to like start on your path towards whatever it is today for you? What was that?
Well, I've taken a deep dive into the 12 and 12 here over the last few years. Ralph and us, we went through line by line in our Thursday group, and I've read it probably cover to cover 3 times now. I'm taking a group of guys through it, and there's something he says in step 2 in the 12 and 12 that now looking back in the rear view, right? He says that, for some people, the group and the steps become the higher power at first. And I never thought I was a guy who would say the words I'm about to say. But when I was in the basement of that treatment center and the guy who took me through the steps came and we took our third step in the storage closet on our hands and knees and holding hands, from the world I come from, you don't get on your knees and hold hands with another man. You just don't. And there was something sincere, right? So the book says, and what's been in my life, I'm really trying to get away from saying the words what the book said, but like what's been in my life is I sincerely took a position and all sorts of remarkable things began to transpire, right? And I grew up in a Muslim home. My family immigrated to the United States in the 1980s. And so when I first got sober, I had this guilt about walking away from the faith I grew up in. And so I did some reading about it. And then I started to struggle in my first year and a half, very little changed about my character when I first got sober, other than my willingness to sponsor other men. So I was a train wreck in my early sobriety when it came to women in the program. I hurt a lot of women in the program. I had to go make those amends. And as a result of that, I began to struggle with the bedevilments on page 52 a great deal. And I was at a meeting when I was 9 months sober. This guy was handing out CDs. He handed out these 2 CDs. One guy on a CD has got a patch over his eye. He's from Texas. The other guy, he's passed away. His name was Mark Houston. I put the CDs in my door, didn't listen to him, right? And as Ralph says, everything I've had to go through in my 17 years has had to happen this way to get me to this moment, right? Ralph will tell you that he had his fire and brimstone, chapters of his life way back when. I had my fire and brimstone. This is what ushered me into that portion of it. Was when I was a year and a half sober, I was miserable. I started to get a reputation in meetings, in clubhouses. What I was doing was not okay. And I'm driving home on a Thursday night from a young people's meeting, and I get the intuitive thought, inspiration, the CD, take it out of the door. It's been sitting there for 9 months. I put it in, and this guy's talking about meditation and how he loves meetings that start with meditation because they bring you here now to the only moment that really exists. It's the only place you have access to God. The consciousness of the presence of God is sure to come to you from page 51 in our book. Brandon, we talk about this. We're cultivating an experience. And this was 2009. And I think this is the story you wanted me to tell. I got into like a Christian mysticism phase. I got into a Hindu phase. I got into a Taoist phase. And I went to we had this guru from India came over, and we went and hung out with him, and we did meditations with him. And then I got a new sponsor, and I called him up, and I said, I want to learn about meditation. And he's, this is why I to this day, I love this man. He didn't try to tell me as a sponsor or a teacher, or he said, Tarek, why don't you go to a Buddhist monastery? They've been meditating for 2,500 years. They'll teach you everything you need to know about meditation. And so I had just moved back into my parents' basement. I had a ton of money I had to pay back as part of my financial amends, and there was no way I was going to pay it back living on my own. And I'm walking my dog, and I grew up in this neighborhood. And every time you pulled out of my parents' neighborhood and you went a quarter mile down the road, there was a building that was off the road, and there was these brick walls, and they had Chinese writing on them. I just thought it was a Chinese church, an Asian church all these years. So I'm walking my dog, literally, like Scott had made the recommendation on Tuesday. This might be Thursday. I'm walking my dog, and there are banners there that say free meditation classes. And so I went and I took the meditation classes, and I did the weekend meditation retreats. And so the first meditation class I went to, it was all Buddhist nuns and Shifu. That's what we called her. She came to the head of and Brandon, actually, you remember I took you guys to the Grand Master.
Yeah.
I took you and Rick to when the Grand Master came from China. And so she brings this bucket of dirty water. It's a construction bucket, big old bucket. She sets it down, and we immediately go into like a 40-minute sitting meditation. First meditation class. And so the meditation's over. We get up, we do a walking meditation, and then you take a break, and then you drink tea, and then you come back in, and she does a teaching. And her teaching that night was, look at the bucket. It's crystal clear. All the dirt had settled to the bottom. And she said, this is the human mind. This is what happens. And, for every individual, the amount of time it takes for all the thoughts to settle down is different. Well, what I can tell you with my conception of God over all these years, because I did go through the Hindu, the mysticism, the Christian Thomas Merton, Krishnamurti, the Tao, and I met a man that had been a practicing Sufi for 35 years, and he's still, I see him once a month, and he ushered me into a new phase of development. Ralph came into my life shortly after that. I got to tell this story, Brandon. I'm going to turn it back over to you because I do have a question here, but we're talking about conceptions. And so somewhere around 2013, character, the refinement of your character came into play, the etiquette of life, not judging yourself harshly because we're all going to fall on our faces. But today, my spirituality is based on how I work in the four walls of my own home. That's the most important work I do, not Alcoholics Anonymous, nowhere else. In the four walls with Newly and my two boys, trying to do the best that I can for them to respect me more than anybody else on this planet. That's so important to me, to be respected by the people that I love the most. And that has to do with God. That has to do with the spiritual condition. That has to do with being flexible. That has to do with character refinement. And so, I met Ralph in 2010, and then I met him. He was speaking in Atlanta. I don't even know if he remembers this, but then in 2017, I hosted Ralph while my marriage was falling apart. And Ralph, my ex-wife, had a blackout episode while he was staying with me. And so it was unraveling, and Ralph held my hand. And so I've been talking about this word companion. He was a companion with me. And then my dad was dying, and I was the primary caretaker of my father at the time. So I'd like to say my relationship with Ralph was forged in fire. But he's the one that ushered me into this idea of being gentle, into being flexible, into understanding the different, very subtle ways I still play God in my life, because ultimately that's what separates me from the moment. Being a child of the moment is my current conception. It's ongoing. And Brandon played a huge role. I'm going to tell a story that you've probably forgotten about. Brandon went through this phase. It must have been 2014 or 15. I can't remember, where every inspiration he got, he followed it. Every intuitive thought he got, he followed. It was an experiment. One of the things I hope everybody on this call walks away with is your laboratory. You are a laboratory. You can do these experiments yourself, and you can gather your own results and your own evidence. Sometimes I think we don't want to conduct the experiments because we have this old idea that says they're not going to work, and we're scared if we do the experiment, it's going to work, then we're wrong about our old idea. It gets exposed as an incorrect assumption, and we don't like when our assumptions are incorrect. And so I don't know if that sparks any stories for you, Brandon, but I remember that phase of development in your life where you were following every inspirational thought that came to you. So go ahead.
Well, the same on the same disc that I got exposed to it early on, that Mark Houston disc, and I listened to that thing on repeat. Like I the first 3 minutes and 27 seconds I could recite for you, probably even still, because I'd listened to it so many times. And it was talking about steps 10 and 11, and it was talking about this concept of something that, like, of being present to everything, that it sounded just that mystical, right? So then I followed what you followed, and I there's a bookstore in Atlanta called the Phoenix and the Dragon. I was down there buying every book on Christian mysticism and Taoist mysticism and Buddhist mysticism, and I got a bookshelf back there that looks pretty impressive of a bunch of spiritual books that I've only read about a quarter of them. But it's like I if Spirit said go here, go there, do this or do that, then I did it, and it produced a lot of kind of crazy results, and people have thought that I was very kind of losing my mind a little bit. And, like, I didn't know exactly where we were going to go. And we're not going to have time for you guys to really think that I've lost my mind, because there's so many concepts that I'll play with from time to time. But so there was a period where I would have these full on arguments in my head with whatever spirit is telling me to do something. Um, the one that's coming to mind right now, I got like 10 of them, but the one, well, I'll do this one because this is the one I like. Um, so I was going to see a client, and then I was going to go to a lunch, a noon meeting. And when I went to go see the client, they weren't there. And so I, was in this no man's land where I didn't have time to go back to the office, but I also, if I went to the meeting, I would be there like way too early to even set up the chairs. And so I was kind of just finding a way to waste time, and I ended up going and using the restroom, even though I didn't really have to use the restroom. And as I was using the restroom, the thought came of go outside, and I was like, whatever. I'm washing my hands, and the thought said go outside. I was like, okay, whatever, I'll go outside. And so then as I was coming out of the restroom, I looked outside, and I was parked on the other end of the building, and the thought said go outside, and I was like, I'm not going out there. So I turned to go to the elevator, and this thought yelled at me, go outside. And I was like, okay, fine. So I go outside, and I'm looking outside. I'm like, all right. I'm like the part of the 11th step where it says that we're not going to be inspired at all times. We might pay for this with all sorts of absurd actions and ideas. And I'm like, I'm saying that to myself. Like, is this one of those times where I think I'm inspired, but I'm not inspired? And um, so I turned to go, and I put my hand on the door handle, and it yells at me again, go outside. I was like, all right, fine, God, I'm out of here. What do you want? And so it was spring, and the tulips were coming up, and the trees were budding out. And I decided, well, I guess I'll just walk around the building and go to my car that way. And as I'm walking, this white pickup truck pulls up next to me, and this lady rolls down the window, and she says, "Excuse me, sir, can you help me find this address?" And I was pretty proud of myself because I just got my first smartphone, and I was going to go in, I was going to pull up the address and be like, "Oh yeah, no big deal." And so she hands me the sheet of paper, and I read the address, and I put my phone back in my pocket. And I say to the lady, "Okay, what you're going to have to do is you're going to go up to this stop sign at the end of this road. You turn left. You climb to the top of that hill. There's a stoplight. You turn left there. It's going to be a retail establishment on your right side. You're going to come down this hill. There's going to be another stoplight. You're going to see the big performing arts center there. You're going to go down that road. You're going to go around a curve. You're going to come up a hill. There's going to be a bank on your right. There's going to be another stop sign. There's going to be two gray buildings on your left. It says Galleria 75 out in front of it. I want you to turn in there, and I want you to go in between those two buildings all the way to the last suite on the left." And she says, "Thank you, sir. We have been driving around here for 45 minutes. looking for this place. It took us 6 months to get this appointment, and we were afraid we were going to have to reschedule it. She says, "You've absolutely saved our life." And I said, "You're welcome. Enjoy your day." And they left off. Now, the address that was on her piece of paper was 3200 Cobb Galleria Parkway, Suite 200, Atlanta, Georgia, 30339. And the reason that I can recite that to you is because for 7 years of my career, I worked at 3200 Cobb Galleria Parkway, Suite 240, Atlanta, Georgia, 30339. So I was in this mode where like inspiration came and I followed it. Now, this was also a period of time where I probably hadn't missed a single day of meditation in probably 4, 5, 6 years. And so like I really had gotten in this mode of trusting and relying upon whatever the spirit was telling me. And I was doing a lot of other things at that time. We ended up buying a piece of property and putting down half the money. And when my wife and parents wanted to know where the money was coming from to actually pay for the rest of it, I would just say that, well, I'd say it's just gonna show up. But what I was saying was God's gonna provide it. And I kept doing that and kept doing things like that. And the people around me just thought I was just losing my marbles. But what happened is that all these things started happening and falling into place. So for me, it was more of like the action was the faith, right? Is I had the faith that whatever this power is going to show up and take care of it. And so the power showed up and took care of it. And so like that's kind of the phase that I was in. And you know, it's funny to me because as I, you know, trusting and relying upon God, I think it's a good place for you to insert your Hulk story.
Oh
of
God.
of of like what does it really look like to trust God in
Yeah.
your life, and does it always turn out perfectly and rosy like I just described?
Yeah. You know, the idea of having a conception is sort of humorous today, because if I could change something about the 12 steps, I would change one thing. It's a God of our experience and not a God of our understanding. And Brandon described an experience, and there are experiences that I've had that solidify my knowing that there is a power that exists in this universe um, that I can build a relationship with, that I can communicate with and dialogue with. And the dialogue's not always pretty. In 2014, you know, Ralph and I talk about good chapters and bad pages and good chapters and peaks and valleys. And if you were to ask me this entity called God that I think is a providential God that I can petition for help, for his presence, not consulting because things aren't going my way and I'm not getting the results, but just the presence. Because I don't need God's help, I need God. There's a difference between that. Because usually when I want God's help, I want things to end a certain way. And in 2014, he refused to do things my way. You know, in 2014, it started out with me going through the steps with this old bruiser from Colorado named Bob O. And Bob had me at my third step, and he said, "Tarek, what are you willing to put on the altar to God?" That was his question. And I didn't really understand what the question meant, but we were talking about sacrifice. And he says, "What are you willing to put on the altar to God?" When you think of this idea of God's will, what comes to mind? And of course, wonderful things. God filling me with his loving spirit so it flows through me into the lives of others, right? You know, God's going to do magnificent things in my life. He's going to part the sea so I can walk through and become successful and help all these people and not struggle and just be great. And but that's not what God did in 2014, especially after I said those things to Bob, and Bob said to me, "Tarek, what if," at the time I had a stepdaughter, he said, "What if your stepdaughter gets cancer and dies? Could that be the will of God? What if you lose your ability to provide for your family? Could that be the will of God? What if your marriage falls apart and nobody wants anything to do with you? And could that be the will of God?" He went down this list of things that were not pleasant to think about, and then being the will of God. And so he asked me to sit with that consideration for a week, and I did, and I took my third step and I started writing inventory. And around the same time, there was an ice storm or snowstorm in Atlanta. And I remember I slipped and hurt my back and I had a pinched nerve and it was just excruciating. And then I had my kidney stone. If anyone's had a kidney stone on this call, it's a horrific experience. And they shot me full of morphine. I had not felt that sensation. This was January, February of 2014. So I'm coming up on 6.5 years. And I get shot full of morphine. And my ex-wife had a girls' weekend, and I had to put the dog to sleep while she was out of town. Our home was burglarized. We had to move back into my parents' basement. I had 5 surgeries. I went in for a knee surgery, and they said, you'll be on crutches for 3 to 5 days. When I came out of surgery, they said it was a lot worse than we anticipated. You'll be on crutches for 8 weeks, and I got depressed. And I started eating a lot of food, gaining a lot of weight. My stepdaughter at the time began to have seizures, so we discovered she had epilepsy. And I battled depression for the first time. It was so bad that my ex-wife went behind my back and called my sponsor. It's the only time a spouse of mine has done that in 17 years. This is how I wouldn't get out of bed. I wouldn't draw the shades. I wouldn't binge watch whatever. I don't know if binge watching was a thing yet in 2014, but I wasn't doing that either. And so this was one day I tried to put on one of my favorite shirts and it didn't fit. And I screamed into the mirror and I ripped the shirt off of me like the Incredible Hulk, like Hulk Hogan. And I screamed so loud that I hurt my vocal cord. And all these surgeries are coming at me, and I just didn't understand. God, why were you doing this to me? I've done all this work. I've tried to do your work and stay close to you and do all these things so I could let go of my plans and designs, but it wasn't happening. And I walked out of the bathroom. I fell to my knees, and I said, God, please help me. Keep me safe and protected. I can't recite the exact prayer I used that day, but at my lowest point, I experienced God's protection,
Right.
God's mercy, and God's grace. So we're getting close to the end here. I mean, he and I could probably do this for hours and hours and hours. So, Brandon, do you have access to the letter?
I think it's in my car. I have access to the
Okay.
text message, but so it was I could
Well,
summarize. Well, what do
Well,
you want to say?
you know how Sarah told you to stay sober for your kids? Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
the mother of my children, you'll notice that my language is intentional with that. The mother of my children, she was the woman I was married to. Her name is also Sarah. But she is, you will never hear me refer to her the way that most people refer to the people that they were in a relationship with previously. So the mother of my children, when I made amends to her, um, I got to the end of it and I asked the question of, what do I need to make things right with you? And she said, stay sober for your kids. And I was like, sweet. I'm planning on doing that anyways. Um, And it really wasn't until a couple of years ago when this lady named Amy D was talking at the Appalachian Regional Roundup, and she was talking about how she made a similar amends, and she went back to her sponsor and said, "Oh, they just told me to stay sober." And her sponsor said, "So what are you doing to stay sober?" And she's like, "Well, I'm praying, I'm meditating, I'm sponsoring people, I'm making my amends, I'm being active at home groups, so on and so forth." And her sponsor said, well, then that's what you're supposed to do for the rest of your life. And so when I heard that, I was like, oh, that's what she meant, is I'm supposed to do that. And like that seemed like a very simple request when it was made. But years later, my daughter, who she's 18 now, but she was 4 when my wife kicked me out. She wrote me this very eloquent, wonderful letter that makes me sound really awesome and present and like I'm the greatest dad ever. So I'm really sad that I don't have it here to read to you because it's that great. But um, my it was well, I can tell you exactly when it was because here's the text message. So June 8th, or it was a little before the beginning of June. I get a phone call from Sarah, and she's with my daughter, and um, they're headed over to one of my daughter's best friend's house. And it still gets me when I tell this story. And so Sarah said, "I'm in the car with Mason, and I'm calling you because you'll know what to do." And she said, "We're headed over to Anna's house because Scott, her dad, he drank himself to death last night, and not only did he drink himself to death, but he made sure that he called like 30 times." And so like this family sitting here with this, like after he would call and yell at them after a couple of times, they stopped answering. And so we can't even die right as alcoholics. Like he kept calling and braiding them, and they just refused to answer the phone call. And so this family's left with this idea that like if they would have answered the call, maybe he'd still be alive. And so they're driving over there, and they're like, she says, "We need to know what to say. We need to know what to do." And I said, "You can't say anything. There's nothing you can do other than just be there and love them and listen to them." And it's like, you can't tell them it's going to be okay because it doesn't seem like it's going to be okay. You just have to be present and do whatever they need to do and love them. That's all you can do. And several weeks later, after summer hit, my daughter went with the family because Scott's last request was that his ashes be spread on the beach in the Panhandle of Florida because that's where they used to go to vacation as a family. And so my daughter was there for that experience, and she texted me this. She said, "I just wanted to text you and say that I'm so grateful you got sober. I just had to watch Anna, Lisa, and Lily spread Scott's ashes. And it was the most awful thing. I love you so much, and I appreciate you more than you will ever know." You see, when the request was made, I thought it was just stay sober because that's what I'm supposed to do. But what happens is when God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, the longer we're here, the more that we understand the reasons why the things are happening to us. And in that moment, I realized how important it was for me to stay here and be sober and do this and carry this message and do all these things. And how better to do that than to make sure that whatever this thing is that connects us all to, because to me, it's more of an energy force. It's more of a field. It's God, it's goddess, it's nature, it's whatever you want to call it. Like my job is to connect with that thing as deeply and as powerfully as I can, so that when I'm asked to do something and an intuitive thought comes and I'm supposed to call somebody, or I'm supposed to be here, I'm supposed to be there, is that I'm capable of doing that. But if I'm not trying to perfect and enlarge my spiritual life to work and self-sacrifice for others, I'm never going to get there. I'm never going to understand this. And in the 12 and 12, it says progress, not perfection. I don't particularly care for it. I like the way that it talks about it and how it works, where it says we claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. And so for me, it's like, I'm never going to make that perfect spiritual connection. But if I'm attempting to make that perfect spiritual connection, chances are I'm going to end up pretty close. If I'm aiming for the bullseye, I'm going to end up target. If I'm aiming for the target, I might miss the target. So I need to aim for that perfection, knowing that it's never going to be possible. And so for me, like why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want to have the greatest possible life? Why wouldn't you want to be the greatest possible sponsor? Why wouldn't you want to have the greatest possible relationship, be the greatest dad, be the greatest mom, be the greatest son, be the whatever it is? Why wouldn't you want to do that? And so to me, like the closer I get to whatever this power is, the more that is achievable for them. And so for me, and for Tarek, like it's like, am I going to seek this thing like the desperation of a drowning man or not? And when I do that, all sorts of remarkable things come to pass. So I went off along there. So
Oh, you're good, brother. I can listen to you all night. So we've got three questions and we're running close on time. I think we've gone over a little bit actually. Raquel, I was thinking we would take a stab at the three questions real quick because I can address all three of them in like 4 to 5 minutes. And then Brandon, if you want to address them in 4 or 5 minutes, then we'll wrap the meeting up. Is everybody okay with that? Okay.
You go for it. Do whatever you want. We're having chips. We're having fun. I'm loving it. Please go for it, guys.
Um, Ralph dropped some questions in there. When it comes to your relationship with God, what is your wheelhouse? I guess what I hang my hat on, is that the other way to say that? And then what is your kryptonite? Um, my wheelhouse is, there's three paths to God. There's the path of love, there's the path of knowledge, and there's the path of experience. And I think Brandon and I are a good aggregate of all three of those things. But I've always been a guy who's strong in the intellect. And so that has been my kryptonite. I'm a guy who thinks my experience is the experience. And if your experience is different from my experience, you must be lying about your experience. And that's the way I operate sometimes. And that is by far my kryptonite. And it is, I have been, I believe, a spearhead for God's ever advancing creation. But sometimes the spearhead's really hard, and he's rigid. And for a long time, that was rigidity was my kryptonite, my way or the highway type mentality. But today, when you say, what is in your wheelhouse, guys, what is attractive to me today is like, I'm wrong. Ralph discovering, and helping me discard an old idea, helping me identify where I play God, right? And that to me is the strongest tools in my wheelhouse, but there's another transparent tool in my wheelhouse. So, the sane and sound sex ideal, for instance, that's in our big book. I have one. And Newly, if you're still on the call, but so every few months I text it to her, and it has the ideals I want to live by as a stepfather and her partner. And if I'm falling short, I want her to be comfortable in telling me. And she gives me a report card because Ralph says, don't grade your own paper. So I have Newly grade my paper. She's the one that knows me the best. She sees me with all the egg on my face. And so you ask me for what's in my wheelhouse. It's going to be my desire to be rigorously honest. Ralph said something to me last week that really struck me because I have a difficult time. I communicate with my sponsor almost every week, most weeks more than one time a week. And he said, Tarek, that is not the typical experience for most people after they've been sober for a while. And here I am trying to force the men I sponsor into developing something they may not have as a design feature. All I can do is figure out, okay, I need to pull some teeth with this guy. He struggles in this area, so I got to ask a lot of questions. And so that's the answer to that question, Ralph. I hope that does it justice. And then Raquel, I want to hear about the idea of a tapestry, how that image came to you. Have you returned to the religion of your childhood? I don't practice a religion. What I try to practice comes out of the big book, but it's also through a tradition that's attached to Islam, which is called Sufism, because I've had a guy who's been in my life that I meet with on a regular basis. He's been a practicing Sufi for almost 50 years, and he teaches me things. And with all the things he teaches me and all the knowledge I've developed and all the spiritual practices, I still get Ralph asking me questions. Tarek, what are you doing? Tarek, what did you just do? And I don't have the answer. Tarek, what did you just do? I just made it about me, Ralph. I still, with all these practices, I can still go to that place and making it about me. But that man introduced me to this concept of, God was a hidden treasure. And God wanted to know itself. So it created existence, the tapestry, right? And so I think of God as this creation machine. And so it has to have an infinite number of possibilities for existence. It doesn't think of murder being bad. I was sexually abused from 5, 6, and 7 by a family member. God is still, that was an experience in the tapestry. It's a beautiful experience now. It's a wounding that I get to use to help other men. So why would I look back on it and think, oh, I can't believe God did that to me? Because God doesn't think, first of all. It just creates, it just creates. And so um, I've sort of gone back to the religion of my childhood, but I don't consider myself a Muslim. I don't consider myself a Christian or a Hindu. I consider myself a person who wants to think about God as often as possible and remember God, remembrance, the remembrance of God. The spiritual experience appendix says that most of us believe the essence of the spiritual experience is the awareness of a power greater than ourselves. And so that is the task at hand. And so you guys are very fortunate because right now I'm in the middle of a practice. I'm taking a group of guys through the steps. I do 2 groups a year. I take a bunch of people through the steps. And our practice this week is to put our alarms on our phone to go off every hour on the hour and to stop what you're doing when your alarm goes off and just try to remember God. But you're also, for me, I've experienced some sadness because I realize in the past 59 minutes, all I've been doing is right here. And there's a sadness in that for me because I have that desire to want to remember God as often as possible. And I think that's at the essence of the experience. That's my religion, if you want to attach a label to it, but it's practicing the remembrance of God because God remembered me. If you think about alcohol and drugs, they dismembered me. They tore me apart. And on November 4th and November 5th in 2007, God began to remember me, put me back together. How can I not have a desire to remember him? Right. In chapter 6 and the 12 and 12, it talks about spiritual perfection. We're doing spiritual progress towards spiritual perfection. We're never going to achieve it, just like Brandon said. But if we aim for it, if our desire is perfect, that pleases God, I think, whatever God is. The last question, and I went way more than 4 minutes, but here we go. You mentioned that you have potentially evolved beyond a singular conception of concept. Can you talk a little more about that? So here, Brandon and I have very different conceptions of God. His is true, mine is true. His is false, mine is false. That's beauty right
Well,
there.
I would say it differently. Is they're both correct, just not entirely.
Okay, I like that. What I love about what Brandon and I do is we dialogue about this stuff and we don't care about proving the other person wrong. That's what's important. You're just kicking around the ideas. You're comparing notes about living this thing called life. What if it's not even us that's living? What if it's God living through us and we just forget that? These are all God's experiences. Right? We hear it all the time in meetings. Everything, well, some people believe this. God's will is everything that's happened in my life up to this very point. So whose experience is it, mine or God's? Because every person on this call could make that statement. And the last question is, what has moved you towards it? Curiosity. Curiosity about the spiritual realm. It's like I've tapped this unsuspecting inner resource that's not me. And I think it's phenomenal that I used to be a streetwalker doing the aimless walk at 4 and 5 in the morning, hanging out in abandoned houses, doing all kinds of crazy things. And now my favorite thing to do, one of them is to sit in the presence of God and build my relationship with my family. Being at home, just these simple things from a guy who was walking on the street 17 years ago. Any power that has the power to do that, I want to have a experience with on a regular basis. The greatest gift God has ever given me is my recovery. And what I do with that recovery is my gift back to God. And I truly, with all that I am, hope and pray that God is as pleased with my gift to him as I am with his gift to me. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name's Tarek. Brandon, you take us out.
You know, the I think my kryptonite is see, I don't really look at like defects and shortcomings. I kind of look at it as like different sides of traits. And so, um, Tarek and I both, we think we're pretty big deals, and we like to think we know what we're talking about. And that's a defect a lot of the times. But when it comes to this meeting, you guys all showed up to listen to us. So, I mean, maybe it's not a defect in this meeting, right? And so, I would say that some of the things that I've misused over the years in sobriety and with God is like getting a little bit weird. I like to go way out there. I like to explore a lot of stuff. I like to feel the energy in the trees and watch the animals and see how they interact. I love having fifth steps out here on the farm around the fire pit and notice that when a guy gets to something significant in his fifth step, when he's talking and he's having a real breakthrough, how magically the chickens end up under his chair. They can be across the farm and they just end up hovered around this guy. Um, one of the defects that I've had throughout my entire existence is this I want to say it's the watcher, but it's really the judger. It's the person that knows what's best and watches how everybody else is still wrong. But it's also uses like the universe uses that for me to observe things that other people can't see, that other people don't pick up on, and to be able to sit there and go and lean against a tree and experience the energy that's vibrating through the tree. To not be afraid to go explore that maybe this isn't the first time I've ever been here in this existence. And maybe that I've had multiple lifetimes. And maybe through the correct kind of meditation, I go back to the source of everything and experience the discovery of the universe by the universe. Maybe I could do those things. I don't know. Maybe I have. But what I found over the years is that the more that I go and explore these things is I can see it when I'm sitting across from a sponsee and we're in the middle of the second step and we're talking about whatever the concept is. And we'll be kicking around a dialogue and kicking around a dialogue. And at some point in time, I lose them and I have to come back. And I have to talk about wherever we lost them. And then I'll try to progress through the conversation about spiritual things. And then I'll lose them again. Once I lose them the second time, I don't start playing with more concepts. So one of the things that I've really done over the years is like I try to find somebody that knows more about something than I do. And I want to go steal all the information that they have and claim it as my own and go explore more. And I've drifted away from the fellowship before and I've come back. And I've drifted away and I've come back. And the thing that I've found over the years is that there's nothing that gets me more geeked out and gets me more excited about the spiritual path than sitting down and kicking around ideas with other people and trying to explore how can I communicate here at this level with my 18-year-old stepson and go have this conversation with this guy way up here and be able to communicate to everybody in between. And so for me, the thing that I seek God for is to be the most flexible. And some other teachings that I've studied is the person that has the most flexibility behavior controls the system that it's in. And so for me, it's my God is not rigid. It is very loose. I'm in the middle of reading a book right now that's about the inner goddess, and it talks about all the Hindu goddesses and what we can use them for and explore those. I've got books on sitting on my desk right here. I've got a Taoist book and a book that's about uh, finding the wisdom within you, and then I've got a Emmett Fox book which is about Christianity and a lot of the kind of the formulation of what's in our big book. And then over the years I've done so many other things. And so to me, and I think for Tarek too, the big thing, the big takeaway, if you don't hear anything else, is be curious, be a seeker, go find something and get interested in it. I love the experience that I have of like my concept of God has shifted so much that we've got goats and chickens and ducks and hogs and we used to have emus and like just through watching the nature of nature and being able to experience it as it is. Um, when we first got the farm, we got a bunch of chicks and we didn't have any adult chickens. We just got chicks. And so these chicks had nothing, absolutely nothing to understand how to grow up and be chickens. Nothing. And the craziest thing happened is that when these chicks grew up, you know what they acted like? Chickens. Nobody showed them how to do it. They just did it. And then we got more chicks later on, and they had these other chickens to look at and learn how to be chickens, and they turned out exactly the same. And I get to watch the nature of the roosters and the chivalry that they have towards their hens, and how when they find their food, they cluck to bring the hens the attention to come and feed while they protect and watch. And so much of whatever my concept is has evolved from the experience of my life and through watching these different things and through having conversations and through trying things and through trying to go deeper and understand more. And so for me, like, I don't know what the answer is. And I sure hope that I never find out because I don't go to a movie just to get to the end of the movie. I go to the movie for the movie. And so, like, the best I can tell, the purpose of life is life. And the experience that we have while we're here is the thing that we're supposed to experience. And so I want to connect with that, whatever that experience is, whatever can get me the most present to the experience of my life. Now, I don't do it perfectly. I fall asleep a bunch and I wake back up and I fall back asleep. But like if this whole meeting is about selling you on the concept of whatever you think you know is completely wrong and go deeper, like that is what I think that we should be talking about. And we're done, so I can't talk anymore.
Oh my God. Oh my, I am so happy. I'm gonna allow everybody in a minute after I just do this closing thing. I gotta say to both of you, I was moved in several occasions. Thank you. And I got the goosebumps so many times so that I know I love that. Thank you so much. In closing, and after this, please feel free to open your mics and thank both of our speakers who were so amazing. We hope no one will consider these self-revealing accounts in bad taste. Our hope is that many alcoholics desperately in need will hear these stories and be persuaded to say, yes, I am one of them. I must have this thing. Thank you, guys, and feel free to unmute to thank our speakers, please.
Thank you both.
Thank you so much, you guys.
Thanks, y'all.
It's just
Thank you,
fabulous.
Thank you,
Terry.
brothers.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. Thanks,
Thanks,
Terry.
Brandon.
Thanks, Brandon.
Well done. Well
Thanks,
done.
Brandon.
Love
Tarek.
you, brothers. Peace.
You made Newly proud.
Thanks
It
for
was,
doing this. Thank you so much.
Incredible. Thank you.
it was
Love you.
okay, I guess.
It was absolutely beautiful. Oh, the recording, I have to stop it.